Hey everyone, this is Rocky from WeLearnChess.com, and I've got the first video here in what I think is going to be a really fun series. This series is going to be on punishing early queen activity by your opponent. So we often learn these basic chess principles when we're taught, in the opening, try not to make too many pawn moves, develop your knights before bishops, try not to move your major pieces out too early. Get castled, things like that. So when your opponent actually breaks these principles, you want to try to look for ways and see if you can get an advantage. You have to be a little bit careful because sometimes it's something that I do often where I like to play for the initiative, and when I see something that seems to violate a chess principle, I'll try to really think how I can crush it, and sometimes you really can't crush it. I mean, there's certain openings like the hippo comes to mind, the hippopotamus. It's so annoying, but it's really solid, and it just looks like you should be able to totally destroy black, but it's not so easy. So you have to be careful because sometimes you can actually give your opponent a good position, or you can even manage to fall into some own tactics yourself if you're a little too aggressive. So, but there are times where if your opponent's making a lot of queen moves in the opening and violating that chess principle, where you can actually look for ways to try to gain some tempi, and we've seen that idea in, for example, the queen c3 variation of the fried liver, where the early queen moves can really hurt white. So maybe that could have been the first video in the series, but I'm going to start out with a different one because I just had a game about an hour ago on chess.com that reminded me of an old line that I hadn't thought about in a while. It's in the advanced variation of the Caro Kann. So let's take a look at it. First, a quick game of mine where we see some variations of it, and then I'll show you a recent game from the U.S. Championship from a few years ago. So let's take a look here. So we got the advanced Caro Kann. I played the short variation, and black plays for an early c5, which is pretty common. I used to try to play c4 here just because I felt like I should be able to castle pretty quickly, and black's going to have trouble. But I've never really been able to, really punish black for that. So I don't think c4 is actually a good move here. Just playing bishop e3, the computer likes that best after I left it on for about 10-15 minutes. Stockfish seemed to like that. So my opponent played knight c6 here. Now, in the game after this, we'll take a look where black plays queen b6 before knight c6, which is even worse. In the game, my opponent does go for this early queen activity, and we'll take a look at it. So, okay, as white here, I didn't really want to play, some kind of lame move like c3. And actually, having this pawn on c2 really helps you in some of these variations, because a lot of times black will play for queen b6 at some point. And having this pawn on c2 shields you from this bishop. So you can either put a rook or a queen, and usually, surprisingly, it's going to be the queen in some of these variations, where it can't just get taken by the bishop. So that's a reason actually not to play c3 in these advanced variations. And you can look and see here that white's development is already getting started. So what you can actually do is just castle here, and after queen b6, which my opponent played, he's putting a lot of pressure on the center, but he's also neglecting his development, and he's starting to make queen moves. Okay, so there's pressure here on the center, obviously, and there's pressure now on this b2 pawn. So what can you do here is white? Well, you could try to play some meek move and defend the pawns. But actually what's best is to just develop. You can play knight c3 and allow this pawn to be taken. So if the queen comes in and takes this, it gets really tricky here for black, I'm sorry. So one idea, and I think the idea that the computer likes best, is just plopping the knight into d5 with already ideas of hitting c7 with potential forks. It's got an eye on this square where sometimes you can come in and let it get taken by the bishop if you have some follow-up, and also if this knight ever blocks the bishop, then of course you could jump in there. So it's already creating some troubles here for white. You can also play, that actually gives white an advantage according to the computer. You can also play for this sort of fun variation where if he takes this this knight here, then you'd be able to come in with a fork, on b7, and you're going to get your piece back at the very least, and you're going to have huge activity. So black can't really take this seemingly free knight. If he just trades here, then you've got a lot of pressure here as white. You're already threatening two pawns, and black's development is terrible. I guess he could try to take this, but if he takes the c2 pawn, it's just going to help you get onto the 7th really fast. So probably black would castle here, but then the computer just says you can slowly double your rooks here, and it's really, really hard for black to do stuff here. Like, you know, how's he going to develop his pieces? I think the computer suggests playing c4 just to close this position down and, you know, try to slow white down a little bit here, but you can just double. And then, you know, what's black going to do? So we've already got a thread here. Black has a lot of trouble developing. Like, let's say, for example, I don't even know what he can do here. I mean, if he tries to do something slow with his knight, you're just going to take this pawn. So let's say he tries to do something where he's defending this pawn here. You could always plop this knight in here, and this knight is really annoying because, you know, if black wants to develop his knight here, maybe try to get it over to g6 or something like this, you can plop in with check, and now you're threatening a fork on the next move. And he doesn't really have a square for his dark square bishop, so even this square is covered by the knight. So let's say maybe he wants to try to develop his knight this way. At the very least, you can take it and damage his pawns, and then just proceed from there. You still got great development. I guess maybe he could try to play f6. Oops. But all of this development is really slow. I mean, he can't really ever kick this knight, because if he does this with a6, then b6 is going to be a target. So this knight here is also tied to the defense of the a7 pawn. So basically, black just has a world of problems here. So it's something that, you know, you have to look at. Also, white has ideas of pushing this a pawn up and softening up these black pawns here. So you still have to play precisely from both sides, but or from the white side, I guess I should say. Black really has to play precisely, but you want to make sure you maximize your advantage. So you can take a look at the board and play with some pieces on that. But that's just if that's even if the queen trade, and it's funny to allow queen trade after that. But so I guess white could try to take another pawn here. But again, this kind of runs into a similar theme where you're just taking, and you're getting a lot of material and you're getting a lot of activity. So that's probably even worse. So probably black does have to trade queens here and just allow that activity by white. So if you get this variation in your games where you see after knight c6 and you castle queen b6 and you play knight c3, if he does go for this pawn, then you know that you actually can trade queens here even though he's got the pawn, and just play for huge activity. So let's take a look at a game that was even more fun to watch. And this game was actually covered in a chess.com video by GM Ben Feingold. And if you've listened to any of GM Feingold's videos, then I'm sure you probably enjoyed them. He's a funny commentator, but he also very clear and concise presentation of ideas. So I think it was called, he had some series about your nemesis, like crushing the Caro and crushing the dragon and stuff like that. So some certain lines in these videos. So he did go over this game, and this game was actually from the 2011 U.S. Chess Championship between Larry Christiansen and Yasser Seirawan, and both of these are longtime chess icons in U.S. chess history. So you can look up their profiles if you don't know much about them. Christiansen actually does a couple of games against Chessmaster, and the Chessmaster games, if you have those games on your PC, they're actually pretty good because there's actually there are a lot of great tutorials on there too. But he also has a couple games versus the computer, and of course Seirawan is still active and with teaching and playing in the chess world. So okay, let's take a look at this game here, and we get this advance. Caro Kann here, short variation, same thing up to this point. But now, Seirawan actually played queen b6 before playing the knight out to c6, so slightly different than my game, just immediately going for this pawn here. And it looks pretty crazy here, but as white, you can actually just play knight c3 and allow this, and we're going to see this in this game, what happens if black goes for this pawn. Okay, so now this looks pretty delicate here for white, because this knight's hanging, but in my game I was already castled here. So this knight's actually hanging with check. So it looks totally insane, and it looks like white shouldn't be able to allow this, but actually he can. And it's important to remember a couple moves here. The first one is that queen b1, and we're going to get similar patterns to what we saw in the game. Remember that this c2 pawn shields it. So if, for example, well, obviously bishop can't take because you can just take the queen. But let's see what happens here if he takes the knight. Well, if he takes the knight, then actually the queen gets trapped. You can look, there's actually no safe squares for it to go to, so it's not a free knight. Knight's untouchable. And so that really only leaves, well, I guess he could retreat, but then that just allows this move here, which would be terrible for black. So he basically either has to trade queens, which we saw in the previous video where black is getting this activity on the b file, knight b5 coming, probably quick castle and doubling, so very similar to the variations we saw, and black actually has one less piece out here too. So Sarah actually played what he thought was a good move here, but it actually gets totally crushed in the game. So now black has taken 2 pawns here, and probably felt pretty happy about it at the moment. And there's only one move here, as GM Feingold says, and I was looking around on the computer after this, and it really is true. I mean, there's a lot of ways for white to lose, but you have this really important move, which is an intermezzo check, and this allows you, after whatever blocks, this block is actually worse because probably after castling or rook c1 obviously, then you would actually be threatening a fork here with just taking on b7, getting one of your pawns back and winning material. So the knight has to go here to d7, which is what Sarah plays. Oops. I got the, somehow I screwed this up. Okay, here we go. Somehow I overrode the game. Okay, so Sarah obviously blocks this way, and now before you castle, you don't want to give up this knight with check, but you can play rook c1. And now the queen's running out of squares. So Sarah finds sort of a combination, if you will, of moves to save the queen momentarily. So white's already got 1 pawn back here. Now he's got 2 pawns back, so now material's even. The queen still has to escape, but now it does have a safe square on the b file for the moment. But now it's just an all-out attack, and I'm not going to go into as much detail as Ben did in his video, because if you want to see that, you can check out. That's a fun video to watch, and he also goes over another game, at least 1 more, maybe 2 more after that. So I definitely encourage you to check out those videos on chess.com. But here, okay, just the threats are building up. Knight's pins, queen is still not safe. White has all his pieces out. Black's king's never going to be safe. Kingside development is, it's hard to see even how he'll be able to get his pieces out. But okay, so he just tries to close the position down. We saw that in the last variation too. We're just at least trying to limit the scope of some of White's queenside activity. Here you can just castle. Actually, it is important to castle here, because if you allow like something like bishop d3, pinning your king in here, and with potential mate threats and stuff, you don't want to allow that. So just calmly castling here, and now the game's really over. It was over anyway, I guess, but Yesser just tried to trades queens, but Christiansen doesn't allow it. Some desperate attempts to develop, but after knight b5 coming in here with more threats of forks and checks, it's pretty much over. And then the finishing touch here, which actually is the best move by the computer, is this idea of swinging this bishop over to c3 and just trapping the queen for real, which is what happens in the game. And the queen doesn't really have anywhere to go, so he just gets a couple pieces for the queen, but it's all over now. And this is where Sarah will resign, just with forks and more material coming down, and just an overwhelming attack, and probably checkmate threats too. So a fun game to watch. So if you wanted to check that out on your program, you can find it on something like chessgames.com, the 2011 US Championship. So I hope you enjoyed those games, and if you like to play the the short variation, the advanced Caro Kann as white, be on the lookout for those early queen moves to b6, and know that you can actually safely play knight c3. At the very least, you are going to get a ton of activity for a pawn if that's what happens. Just make sure you remember those moves, especially in this variation where the queen comes out before the knight. Make sure you remember that it's the queen, not the rook, that comes over, and that after a move like this, you only have 1 move to keep the game basically totally in your favor, but you have to remember this intermezzo check. So in my game, actually, I didn't show the end of it, but it was kind of fun to look at. I should have done that towards the end really quick. I'll show that, and then end the video. And actually, this was cool. This was a really short game, but I only made one inaccuracy in this game according to the computer. The computer wanted me to take this pawn on c5 at some point, but I just feel like it's really hard to play, and I don't remember getting any sort of advantage of this. But this is actually a way to show you where, Black realized that his queen could potentially be in trouble here, and he didn't want to take this pawn. But where's the queen going to go if he doesn't take the pawn? He's got to make another move, and he still hasn't developed any of these queenside pieces, or kingside pieces, I'm sorry. In my game, he went back here, and he just, blocked in this king, which is terrible. Now with these open lines, I just get a check here. He actually had to block with the queen here, because after this, not only is he losing the queen, but I'm not losing my piece back, so it's even worse. So he just resigns here. But probably he had to go to c7 here. And, geez, I don't know. I didn't quite look at this variation, but again, you have this check. The king has to move. You could also have gotten a tempo on the queen with a knight move too. I'm really not sure which one's best, but you have a lot of opportunities here to play as white, a lot of fun with the initiative. So, yeah, enjoy those lines with just quick development if you like that kind of play. And if you don't mind giving up a pawn or two on b2 or g2 or b7 or g7 in your games, you might find that you're going to get a lot of activity. So I hope you enjoyed those games, and I'll see you around for the next part in this series, hopefully shortly, on crushing your opponent when he moves his queen around in the opening. All right, take care.